How we doing? This is a little change of scenery, one might say, but I thought after the little trilogy of this battle on the school system, we might as well lighten things up a little bit. And in today's video, I'm going to do a Christian denomination tier list. First of all, this is entirely opinionated. And it is going to be biased as someone who theologically identifies with the Eastern Orthodox denomination, the Eastern Orthodox Church. There is going to be bias. I've seen videos like this before, and it's always biased, right? That's just the reality of it, which is completely fine, and it's fun to see kind of different people's views, um, from different denominations. So let's get straight into it. And first off, we got the Baptists. I guess the first thing we can do is go over kind of the standards for each tier. First of all, I recognize all of these denominations as Christian. Okay. I think people can actually be saved within each of these denominations. That's my personal take. Obviously, I think, none of these are really super like heretical in terms of they deny the Trinity or the basic beliefs that are within the creed. So I think all these are Christian. Because like the tiers on this tier list at least were kind of laid out. Like the last tier was barely Christian, so I just changed it to lettering because I'm like, look, they're all Christian at the end of the day. But yeah, let's get into it. So first we got Baptist, and as someone who used to align theologically with the Baptist, as someone who obviously is more of a Eastern Orthodox, interested in it rather than truly baptized into the church. I do go to a Baptist church right now, but when I become, an adult, I am planning on getting baptized in the Eastern Orthodox Church and becoming a member of that denomination fully. But as someone who goes to a Baptist church, as someone who has gone to a Baptist church for as long as I can remember, I have, I think, good experience, obviously, with Baptist. Um, and with that, I would say theologically, there's a lot of issues because a lot of Baptists tend to be very, independent. Baptist church beliefs can vary just based on the church you go to. And there's a lot of Zionism, a lot of rapture, like normie rapture beliefs, just a lot of stuff that is not historically grounded. And, the belief of baptism as, communion as a symbol and not really holding that much merit to, honestly, the sacraments is an issue I have with the Baptists. They don't have much historic grounding really at all, but they are still a denomination that's some foreshadowing. So I'm going to put them in the C tier. Not completely D tier, but I think there's just too many core issues with Baptists that can be argued for, but it's super hard to argue for, especially when you get into the history of the church where you just realize there's some core problems they tend to stumble upon. Next, we have, I think, a definite improvement, and this is no hate to Baptists. This is my take. But we got the Roman Catholics. Roman Catholicism, I guess this is going to include the Byzantine Rite as well, has much historical rooting, to be quite honest. They are the second, I guess not even the second, they are one of the oldest denominations. I don't think they're the oldest, and that's where it kind of the line is drawn in the sand between Orthodox and Catholic, and Oriental and Eastern Orthodox. The Roman Catholics have a lot of historical rooting. There's no denying that. Theologically, they hit a lot. They get a lot of things right, and I think it's just one of those things where if you're playing a game of darts and bullseye is like legit, right? They're always getting around the bullseye, if not hitting bullseyes, right? And theologically, that's where I would kind of put them. For my own theological beliefs, I think the Vatican and the Catholic Church has had a major, maybe the biggest influence out of really any other Christian organization or any other truly like organization on the Western world and its development and its culture. For that, we have to express some gratitude towards our Catholic brothers and sisters. And for that reason, I still don't align with their theology, with their beliefs fully. So I'm not going to put them in S tier, but the Catholics are going to get a big A tier out of me. Next up, we have the Congregationalists. Congregationalists and Baptists tend to have the same viewpoints on a lot of things. Now, for me personally, admittedly, I have not studied Congregationalist doctrine really that much. I think we associate the Puritans and Puritanism with Congregationalists, which is true to a certain extent. That's kind of when you think of Congregationalists, you think of like Amish, think of Mennonites, you think of the Puritans, maybe the Salem witch trials. I don't know. Um, yeah, so Congregationalists, really, I don't know. They're kind of the OG Baptists, and these were the first. This is like radical reformed. During that entire Protestant Reformation era, the Congregationalists stood out because of their more radical beliefs in comparison to the mainline Protestant churches, such as the Lutherans, the Anglicans, Methodists, Presbyterians. They really stood out. And, for that reason, I'm not going to put them as high as the mainline churches because I think there are some issues they hit. They have more maybe issues than the mainliners, but I am going to put them above Baptist because I still think there's a little bit more historical validity to the Congregationalists. But I'm going off the dome in this video. Baptists, in terms of their ability to evangelize and their following of the Great Commission, their commitment to it has been substantial relative to the Congregationalists. And I think they have brought more people to Christ. That's a hot take that can be debated. Um, this is a spicy one because Baptists and Congregationalists, they kind of have the same feel. Oof, I'm gonna have to go with the Baptist for this. I'm gonna go with it. I go to a Baptist church. Even though I don't agree with everything, I gotta show them some love. I'm gonna give it to them. But that's really could go both ways, honestly, depending on the day. Next up, we got Anglicanism. Anglicanism is really that middle ground between Catholicism and Protestantism and the Reformed tradition. So Anglicanism is interesting because you get Anglo Catholics, you get Anglo Reformed, and it's kind of a spectrum in terms of how Catholic are you, how Reformed are you. Certainly, if we were to go back before the Great Anglican Schism of, I think it was October 2025, our boys would have been higher. But post schism, with the Archbishop of Canterbury being a woman, they have gone woke. The mainstream Anglicanism has, not all of them. And obviously, there's, of course, still conservative Anglican churches, but the Church of England is woke. They would have honestly been high B tier, maybe even low A. Um, I'm gonna put them in C above Baptist. Honestly, that sounds crazy. I'm gonna put them in C above Baptist just because of that. If things do change, they can easily get a high B. They can easily get, honestly, low A. But it's the current state of Anglicanism. There's some issues. Next up, Lutheranism. Lutheranism, if I were to be Protestant, I would be a Lutheran. 100%. Um, Maybe Dutch Reformed for ethnic reasons, because I have Dutch heritage. But theologically, I got to give it to Lutheranism. They put a big emphasis on the sacraments. I think logically, they have a lot going for them. The law and the gospel, kind of treating the Bible as those two separate entities, but that belong to each other and mesh together so well. I don't know everything about or not Anglican, Lutheran theology, but I gotta, tip my cap to them. They have a lot going for them theologically, and I'm gonna put them in that A tier. Surprisingly, I think they're gonna be lower A, but I like the Lutherans a lot. They've held to the conservative tradition. Obviously, liberalism has still kind of invaded the Lutherans, but certainly not as much as other mainline Protestant denominations. So for that, we gotta give it up for them. Next up, we got the Methodists, the Wesleyans, however you want to call it. The Methodists kind of, I think, bridge that gap between radical Reformed and mainline Reformed. That could be a hotter take, but free grace. I don't know. There's some issues. The different Methodist movements that came along that I have with them. I don't think, in terms of like their true contribution to Western society as a whole and society as a whole, it hasn't been as great as some other denominations. Um, but I still appreciate the fact that they hold to the traditional mainline traditions, which is better than the radical reformed, I think, by far. So for that reason, I'm gonna put Methodist in the B tier. And next up, we got non-denominationalism. I'm not gonna explain too long, but they basically can believe whatever they want, and they can because they don't belong to an institution or organization. They're just independent. They're free thinkers. Like non-denominationalism is just like what the hippies were to the '60s. And honestly, this is why like modern Christianity is pretty screwed. Is very much so due to these boys down here. I honestly, I don't want to say they're barely Christian, but depending on the church, that's a different kind of religion. If it's really like an elevation worship, I'm not saying there can be no one saved because I can't make that judgment. Only God can, but I have issues. Now, if we're talking about your non denominational church, down the street, different story, but people just want to feel good message in a rock concert, and that's what non denominationalism is. It's not even Protestant, it's a different religion. It's still Christian, but there's issues. Next up, Oriental Orthodox. Orientals, honestly, hold to, I don't want to say the tradition the best because they're, I don't want to straw man Orientals, but I think theologically there's some issues compared to Eastern Orthodox. This is Coptic, Syrian, Ethiopian. Ethiopian Orthodox, 81 books in the Bible. And some of those books, do not really historically fit. I'm not talking about the Deuterocanon. They got the Bible DLC. Um, I'm not gonna diss too hard my Oriental brothers because I think they're still really close to the fullness of the church. But I'm gonna put them in a tier above Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy. Y'all know they're getting that S tier treatment. I'm at like honestly, you can't deny the historical roots that Eastern Orthodoxy has. You can get into the papacy, but even Catholicism admits that the Pope and the Bishop of Rome's power developed throughout history. Peter did not have universal jurisdiction over the entire church. Peter wasn't the first pope. I can, these are some live rounds I'm firing off, but then you get into the filioque. I'll probably make a video on the filioque. To be honest, orthodoxy holds true to tradition. That's why it's orthodox. Oriental orthodoxy, um, I guess the Syrian Church of the East is what's called Nestorian, but Orientals haven't had as much of an influence either on kind of the Eastern world in general. And I'm not dissing my Orthodox brothers and sisters, but I think Eastern Orthodoxy has more had that overarching influence as well. That's kind of what they get a nod above. That's not my reasons for believing them over Oriental, but if we're doing this in a tier list fashion, obviously, like in reality, I would put Eastern Orthodoxy S tier and everything else in like C or D, right? If we're just talking like, well, yeah, if Eastern Orthodoxy is the true church, then everything else doesn't matter. And there's people who will do that, but we need to judge based off other criteria because they are all like these are all Christian denominations. So, oh yeah, Pentecostalism. I'm gonna put Pentecostals in D above non-denominationalism because Pentecostalism is how non-denominationalism really came about. Pentecostals really started that you know movement. Contemporary Christian music really came from them, and it's bad music in my opinion. CCM, I'll never be able to get with, no matter what. Um, Speaking in tongues, major issue. I huge red flag. Uh, Historically non-grounded, feel good vibe. For the most part. So I'm not a big fan of Pentecostalism. Has a lot of Baptist belief. Like all these three really kind of have the same thing going. Really, all these four, in terms of that, but Congregationalists a little more historically rooted. I did put Baptist above just because a lot of Congregationalists, I guess you would consider the Amish to be Congregationalists. I could be wrong there, but they have abandoned the Great Commission, so that's why I got put Baptist above. We got Presbyterians. I mess with the Presbys. Um, Redeemed Zoomer, kind of the first thing that comes to mind. Predestination, I don't know, a lot of John Calvin's beliefs. I don't really know. But these guys, honestly, Presbyterians have had a lot of influence, especially in America. As an American, I got to give them their flowers there. Presbyterians and Calvinists are very theologically sound. And even though they might have the wrong theology, they have a lot of biblical knowledge, and I got to give that to them as well. I mess with the Presbys theologically. I can't put them with Lutherans, but I put them above Methodists because of their influence on Western society. I think their theology is a little more sound, and they haven't gone full woke like the Methodists have. So for that reason, I got to put them above um, Methodists. And I'm gonna make one change. Honestly, I'm gonna do it. I think Methodists have gone more woke, and Anglicanism originally was closer to Catholicism. Traditionally is and Catholicism is much closer to Eastern Orthodoxy than Protestantism is to Eastern Orthodoxy. So it's kind of like, which is closest to Eastern Orthodoxy? That's true. That's how it's gonna be. But yeah, this is the tier list. Mess with this. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. A nice change of scenery after a whole little series. I hope to do kind of more fun videos like this here and there, just to lighten things up sometimes. So yeah, God bless.